How to read a college textbook. Hello, in this video I show you how to read a college textbook efficiently. I'll give you an overview of my approach and demonstrate on an actual college textbook for a business management course that I'm taking now. First, the top two rules of reading and learning are compress and connect. Compress and connect. I use these top two rules as I read college textbooks. Compress and connect. Compress means to summarize information into high-value bytes that your brain can easily digest. Connect means to look for the structure and relationships between concepts and ideas in the reading. So the top two rules of reading and learning are compress and connect. Compress and connect. Summarize, structure. As I'm reading, there are three tasks that I'm doing as I'm reading the college textbook. Highlight, divide, and comment. Highlight means using a yellow highlighter or red pen to mark key words. Divide means using a black pen to draw lines between major breaks and transitions in the text. And then comment refers to my own notes and diagrams that I write onto the paper printout of the college textbook. So all of this that I'm doing is a concept known as decoding. What's going on here when we're reading a college textbook is communication. The writer, the professor who wrote the college textbook, is attempting to communicate to us using this written format. In order for our brain to take in this information from the professor who wrote the book, we have to decode the information, translate and transform the information into a way that our brain likes to take in information. There's a way that our brain likes to input information. And that goes back to the top two rules of reading and learning, compress and connect. If we compress and connect, summarize and structure our reading, then we are transforming that information so that it is more easily inputted into our brain. Now, reading is only part of the learning process. So after I'm done reading and I'm highlighting and I'm done commenting on the paper printout of the chapter, then I go to step 2, which is recite. And reciting means that I review the chapter with the highlights and the comments, and then I explain the information. I use my notes, the chapter, my reading, as a script for me to be able to explain to somebody else. So this is reciting. And I recommend at least one recitation in order to consolidate and crystallize information into your brain. You're going to learn a lot with step 1, which is reading, but you have to do at least one recitation where you go through and you review and you explain the information. If you can explain it to your friend or just explain it out loud, then you are gaining mastery of the material. And then the third step is repetition. Repetition. The more you repeat it, the more you're going to master the information. So now let me demonstrate with an actual college textbook. And let me give you some context. Right now, I'm taking a college course on business management. So each week, the professor assigns us a chapter. So this week, the chapter is on leading decision making. Okay. This is the PDF of the chapter, which the professor provided for us, has 28 pages. So I printed it out and I split it up into 2 parts. In this video, I'm doing part 1, which is the first 14 pages. Okay, so I printed it out. I got my supplies, which is yellow highlighter, blue, black, and red pen, ruler, clipboard, and so then just again, just to show you, this is a book from Principles of Management, and it is available from Saylor.org, and I'll provide the links for you in the description box. So what you can do is actually look at this chapter and try to read it on your own without any of the markups, and it's a little hard to grasp the information. But once you've done my process of highlighting, dividing, and commenting, it becomes a lot easier to put in the information and then to review and recite and learn the information. So this is the first page, and as I'm going to go through the different pages with my markups, and I scanned this in with a color scanner. So first, on this page here, you'll see that with the yellow highlighter, I highlighted keywords. So what's very important here is you want to highlight very selectively. Do not highlight every single word that you come across. That's not efficient, and it's not helping with the top two rules. The rules are compress and connect. So what I'm trying to do is I'm selecting the keywords. Okay, this helps when I'm reviewing because I can the keywords kind of triggers thoughts in my brain. So this chapter is about one word: decisions, decision making. So if I had to summarize this chapter, one word: decision. So this chapter is about leading and decision making, but specifically one word: decisions. And I already wrote some comments here that came across to me as I was so I was going, okay, decision making, what's this all about? And said the word process stuck out to me, so I said, okay, so this is about the process of decision making, how to make decisions step by step. Also here in the author of this book, the business management book, use as a framework in many of the chapters POLC framework, which stands for plan, organize, control, and lead. And this is a general framework that he presents in every chapter to kind of unify everything in the overall book. It's in multiple chapters. But what POLC framework refers to, these are major activities that a manager needs to do in an organization. And the reason why he's presenting it is to show that decision making is part of the leading activity of a manager. So you have plan, organize, lead, and control, and then decision making. So the reason why I'm looking at this is because this is about structure. Where does this all fit in? So the brain likes context. It needs to know where to put the information. So it wants the information compressed. So it wants a small, bite-sized, high-value piece of information that's easily digested, and it needs to know where it needs to go. So again, this goes back to the two rules. Okay. So now going to section 11.1, again, I highlight, if you look at this overall page here, notice what percentage is white and what percentage is yellow. It's a very small percentage is yellow, maybe 10%, because I only do keywords. So just by going through reading through a chapter, if you're just doing one simple thing, if you have a yellow highlighter and you go through and you highlight only keywords, that's enough to help you understand the material. So that is a high yield activity. So simply going, but let's say it's an 80-20 rule. You want 80% or more white, and you want 10% yellow. So this section is about understanding decision making. Again, one word: decision. And I have a rule that I say to myself is, or a challenge. Whenever I look at material, I try to see, can I summarize this with one word? And that's the ultimate summation. I'll go into stages. Can I summarize it into 3 sentences? Can I summarize it into 1 sentence? Can I summarize it into 3 words? Can I summarize it into 1 word? And so that's the process of compression. So once you get into the habit of compressing and connecting, then your brain will automatically think in this way, and that's how you actively learn. And so decision making, and then learning objectives, so that's giving an overview of the chapter. So what are overviews? Overviews go back to structure. Again, I'm repeating what are these 2 rules: compress and connect, summarize, structure. So I highlighted the word types because we're talking about, okay, different categories and types of decision. So here, what is decision making? The definition: decisions are choices among alternatives. And Okay, now we're going into types of decision. And I put here TOS, types of decision, referring to tactical, strategic, and operational. Whenever you can, try to make things into an abbreviation or an anagram, TOS. Okay, so that stands for tactical, operational, and strategic. All right, strategic decisions or decisions made by the CEO or the board of directors, the management board. Tactical decisions are made by managers. Operational decisions are made by employees or workers actually doing the work. And I said, okay, here's a list here. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, TOS. TOS stands for tactical, operational, strategic. So list, whenever you come across something that is a list, that's something that professors tend to test on. Okay. And so then at the bottom of page 341, I underline the word program. I put it in red. Red is a higher level of emphasis. So yellow is the basic highlighting of words. And then red is when I said, okay, this is something I really need to take a look at here. Why? Because the eye is attracted to red. Red is the most attractive color for the eyes, for the visual system. And then programmed. Okay, so programmed is automated. Again, I'm trying to do keywords. So the word programmed, what's the difference? It's an automated response. So there's two things is when you're learning vocabulary. So you have a vocabulary word here. It's like, what does programmed decisions mean, right? Try to find the keywords to find it, especially if it's one word. So programmed and automated. Then you say it at the same time because that's how you sync them. You have to do the brain learns when you link it, and you link it into by saying at the same time, program automated, program automated, program automated. So repeating, okay? Also, too, is when you're reading, whenever you come across an image, a picture, you got to pay attention to it. The authors put special time to format it into an image form, so you got to pay attention to it. The professor will also, too. Also, the brain learns better with pictures. Okay, so now with this next 2 pages here, you see one of the things I want to show here is the process of where I did division. The 3 tasks I do is highlight, divide, and comment, right? So look at the lines that I use here, and then I try to use, as much as I can, I try to use a ruler because neatness, it just looks better if it's neat. So whenever I have to do long lines, I use a ruler. So why do I have these long lines across the page? That's when there is a break in thought. Now, if I were rewriting this chapter, what I would do is I would make the breaks more noticeable. For example, what I like to do is I like to use multiple layers of headings. Okay, so that they know that there's a break in thought. So sometimes the break in thought, the transition in thinking, is between paragraphs. Sometimes the break in thought is actually within a paragraph, which makes it very confusing. So it's especially important to put when you notice that that's transitioning within a paragraph, you need to break that up, because in order for me to do the compression process, so the assumption is that each paragraph should be able to be summarized with with a few words. But if a paragraph has multiple concepts, then that violates my structure concept. So in general, what I want to do is I want each paragraph to be able to summarize it with one word. Okay. So for example, here on page 342, here on the left side, I broke up this one paragraph, and here's why. Okay. So part 1 of the paragraph here, it talks about non-programmed decisions. Okay, here. Let's start at the upper left corner, 342. So the top of 342, in the left page top, begins with this page. The top of the page talks about programmed automated decisions. Okay? Then it goes into non-programmed decisions. So it goes from programmed to non-programmed. This is a major break. So if I were rewriting this text, I would actually put a header here, non-programmed, and on the previous page I would put programmed. So when I read through this, I read through this chapter without highlighting, and I was lost. And that's because there should have been headings here. Types of decisions. You could have put here 3 types of decisions based on organizational hierarchy. Top level CEO, strategic, middle managers, tactical, frontline workers, operational. Then the second category should be programmed and non-programmed. So it goes from programmed to non-programmed. So then I drew a line here that says this is a major break. All right. And so the next major break is on 343 on the right side of the page. So basically, starting with this header, types of decisions, there should be more headings. So types of decisions, then you have three types of decisions based on the organizational hierarchy rank. So you have CEO, strategic CEO, tactical middle manager, operational frontline workers. Okay. Then there should be another section here. Program versus non-program. You're like going, okay, these are, you could say another way to categorize this decisions are programmed versus non-programmed. So what's programmed? Automatic. So what's a programmed automatic decision? For example, when a pitcher throws a ball at a batter in baseball, the batter swinging and hitting the ball, that's an automated response. When you go to McDonald's and you order a hamburger, you give them money, they give you the hamburger and they give you change, that's a programmed response. It doesn't require deep thinking, okay? So then the second category is non-programmed. And then the last paragraph of this section is kind of like a transitional overview chapter, which might have been moved up to the top. So as you can see here, I'm looking at this as like, well, what if I had to rewrite this this text here, and that goes back to my decoding. So you can try to do this. You can try to read this chapter, because I provide the link, without any of the markups. And then you will find that you're kind of lost because your brain needs context. So it needs to know, where am I going? And then a part of that is you need to know when you're making like when you're on a freeway, you're like, okay, I'm on the 110 freeway, then I'm on the 405 freeway. There's signs that tell you what road you're on. Okay. So going back to page 342, left page, top, starts with programmed, then breaks to non-programmed. Now with this large paragraph should have been broken into 3 paragraphs. And so my philosophy of writing in general is to help my readers when I write, is whenever there's a break in thought, even if it's a 1-sentence paragraph, I just start another paragraph. So here we go. This the first part of this paragraph, which I break into 3 parts. Part 1 is introducing the concept of non-programmed decisions. Part 2 gives an example of McDonald's. Part 3 gives an example of another company called NutriRim. So it's introducing a new concept. Programmed is the previous concept. The new concept is non-programmed. McDonald's example, NutriRim example. So I was confused by this paragraph, but now I can summarize it. So basically, paragraph, part 1, non-programmed decisions. Part 2, McDonald's. Part 3, NutriRim. One word or one phrase. Then I draw another breaker. I'm like, well, what is this picture? It's a picture about McDonald's. Okay. Okay, so then it jumps back here. Decision making can be classified into 3 categories: strategic, tactical, okay, here we go. And then it jumps back to the previous one. Decision making is strategic, tactical, and operational. That goes back to the previous page 341, the diagram, strategic, tactical, and operational. So again, it's confusing. Why are you jumping around? Okay. Then it goes back to programmed versus non-programmed. All right. So this section here, here's part of the confusion. Types of decisions. You have a diagram with TOS, tactical, operational, and strategic, which is discussed on page 343 at the top. And then another category. So basically there's two ways to categorize. There's category based on the level in the organization, CEO, manager, and operational, which stands for TOS. And the other way is program versus non-programmed. So then I came across, on page 343, I came across this paragraph, which was very important, okay? And then it's, if you see here, I even come up with an acronym, BRIC, which stands for 4 models of decision making, okay? But these are non-programmed decisions. So you have programmed decisions and non-programmed decisions, okay? Non-programmed decisions, there's 4 approaches or models. And these can be summarized with BRIC. And it was so important I actually drew a diagram. So, and then I added it to my notes after page 343. So you have decisions, non-programmed, and programmed. Programs automatic, non-programs. There's four models. BRIC. Bounded rationality, rational, intuitive, and creative. Whenever you can come up with a mnemonic, BRIC. Notice how in the government and the military, they frequently summarize, they use a lot of mnemonics actually, like FBI, IRS. And so that because it creates efficiency of communication. So I came up with BRIC. So as you can see here, I had to spend a lot of time on the first few pages of this chapter because it was not well organized. So how would I redo it? I would say types of decisions, 2 ways to group decisions. Group 1 based on level of the organization, which is CEOs do strategic decisions, managers do tactical decisions, frontline employees do operational decisions. Then I would say second way to categorize decisions are programmed automatic decisions and non-programmed. Next, in this category of non-programmed decisions, there are 4 approaches or 4 models. BRIC. So once I had this structure, then I was like, well, now this chapter makes sense. So this was a good chapter for me to demonstrate because it was actually not written well. It's not, the text is not organized. So by dividing it, by highlighting keywords, by making comments, and then dividing it, by dividing the chapters, I was able to construct this diagram, which was so important that I had to draw it on a separate page because it gave me the structure, and then all of a sudden the whole chapter started making sense. Now, then I flipped ahead and I found that, so this is 343, but I found at on 351, there was a very useful table that summarized the BRIC, which is, and then I wrote here non-programmed, so it's important. Decision-making model, non-programmed. There's 4 of them. BRIC, bounded rationality, rational, intuitive, and creative. This was on page 351. So here's another concept of communication. For informational, when you're trying to just convey information, it's important to front-load information. So you have to give context first, and if there is a nice summary at the end, put that in the beginning. You can put it in the beginning and you can put it at the end. So this should have been front-loaded, but this was actually on page 351. So I made a copy and I just put it right here at the beginning of the discussion. But this is go back to decoding. I am transforming the paper printout of this chapter into a script that I can use to recite and learn from. So just the chapter by itself, it's not ready for my brain to digest. And this chapter shows what needs to be done. Now, if the author was a better writer, and that's why I talk about what if I were to have rewritten it, then maybe I would have to do less of this active decoding. So my theory is this: if a student is willing and if they're and the teacher presents the information properly, I believe that any student can learn any material uh, in a college setting. We're talking about academic materials like business management or history or even math. Now, if we're lucky, we get an awesome teacher that teaches us uh, using using good principles of neuroscience. But we're not always lucky, and so we get texts like this. So if that's the case, then we need to be proactive and take control of our learning, and we need to decode the information. So I'm putting a lot of thought into it because I spent a lot of time on these few pages, but the payoff was once I figured out the structure and I found this table, I'm like, okay, now I know where to put the information. If you don't have the overall framework or the structure, then it's very difficult for. The main example is what if you got one of those a phone book? If you're just reading the phone book, you're like, okay, well, but even the phone book is organized alphabetically. So why is information organized? For example, alphabetically or in different categories? Because that's why the brain likes it. Okay, so let's backtrack. So decisions, programs automatic, non-programmed. So you got decisions, programmed versus non-programmed. We are now going to spend more time on non-programmed decisions. And remember this. Decisions, non-programmed, BRIC. Bounded rationality, rational, intuitive, creative. You refer to a diagram several pages ahead, 351. Going back to page 343, this small little paragraph here was very key in understanding the structure of this chapter. So we're talking about non-programmed decisions. The first model is going to be rational. That's the R in BRIC. Rational decisions. And this is the first approach. So what's the rational decision making? Rational decision making is looking at all reasonable alternatives and options and then picking the best choice, best alternative with the hopes of getting the maximum probability of best outcomes. Okay? So this is an intensive process, and then on page 344, there's a diagram of the steps. So this is pays special attention to the images, the pictures in the book. So rational decision making, these are the steps. But basically, you're looking at alternatives and picking the best alternative. So you're picking the best. So again, I'm trying to summarize in one word. Rational decision making, best alternative. Rational decision making, best alternative. That's how I would define it. So looking at this diagram here. Now, going back to this too, is if a book has diagrams, a good way to preview the information is to look at the diagrams first. So in a rational decision making, looking at this image, the 8 steps are identify the problem, criteria, establish criteria, weigh the different criteria, look at the alternatives, judge the alternatives based on criteria and weight, choose the best one, implement it, and then evaluate, feedback. So, are we getting good outcomes? If we're not getting good outcomes, satisfactory outcomes, then we repeat the process. But notice how in the diagram, I underline keywords. So, problem, criteria, weigh, alternatives, best. I'm always looking to compress. Always looking to compress. So going back to page 343, rational decisions. It's a type of non-programmed. We're looking for the best option. We're having to define criteria. Let's say you're trying to buy a car. You're going to say, okay, I want to get an SUV. That's a criteria. You'd say, I want a car with gas mileage over 20 miles per gallon. I want it to be less than $30,000. And then you could say, I'll consider color, but it's not that important. And that goes back to weight. Weight may not be that important, but cost is important. So page 344, So highlighting keywords here. Again, back up and look at these 2 pages. Look how little is actually highlighted. Only a few words are highlighted. But these highlighted words summarize what's in these sections. But look at how often I drew lines, because I'm dividing major sections. And then I draw little squiggles. So whenever I draw lines here, black lines in general are not, it's not to make, it's not highlighting. I use the black pens to divide. So then I can summarize here. This part here we're talking about evaluation. This paragraph is alternatives, objectives, rational decision making. Rational decision making, you do the criteria before the alternatives. So then I did notice how I put a red mark before. Another thing too about highlighting, and also when you're using red pens, you don't need to underline the whole word. The way the I is, you can put a red line underneath the beginning of the word. So criteria before alternatives. Generate alternatives. Then the Nobel Prize winner Henry Simon says that in reality very few people follow this process. Then you do rank them, pros and cons, information. Okay, analysis paralysis, that's when people just get stuck looking at all the information and don't actually act. Analysis paralysis is too much information, not enough action. And then it says here, this paragraph here is a transition into the next section. So that's another thing I don't like. This writer, at the end of some of his discussions, he introduces the next discussion. You're like, well, what are you talking about here? Okay, this part here should just, if you're having headings, you don't need to have these transitions into another section here. But anyway, that's what this is about. So rational decision making is about making the best decision. The next model, which is bounded rationality, is about when it's okay to be not optimal. Okay. So another thing too, and this is, okay, now we're going back to page 346 and 347. Notice here I wrote a lot of comments. Here, going back to the brick analogy, so rational is the R in brick. B is bounded rationality. But this header doesn't have that word. So this table has rational, bounded rationality, intuitive, and creative. This header should say bounded rationality. But the header here is making good enough decisions. So I'm thinking, where does this all fit in? So once I realized, oh, this paragraph's about bounded rationality, so I wrote this in. But I also emphasized to myself over and over non-program, and then I keep drawing to myself, this is part of the 4 models here. So decisions, non-programmed, 4 models, brick. So that's why I wrote here 4, and this is one of the 4. Bounded rationality. Another key word here is satisficing. That should have been emphasized in the heading too. So it should have been bounded rationality. Parenthesis, satisficing. So this header is not very helpful. Well, it's helpful a little bit. And what's annoying is that on the previous page, 354, that last paragraph is talking about this topic. It should have just been lumped in there. Part of the problem too is professors, when they get their jobs, is based on their academic achievements. A lot of times it's maybe in research, and maybe they're better speakers. But some of the ways when you're speaking to somebody in a classroom, it's not the same way as when you write. So because when you're speaking in front of somebody, you can use your body language. You might have images, and then so it's the transitions are a lot better. You wouldn't talk in this way, like this. It's like, so when you write, it needs to be in a more kind of mathematical format. Okay, so let's go back to this. So now what we're talking about here is page 346, left side, top of the page. We're talking about bounded rationality, which is a type of non-programmed decision. Non-programmed decision, 4 models, one of them is bounded rationality. Bounded rationality, keyword, satisficing, good enough decisions. So basically here is what's your minimum criteria. It's like, you know what, I just want a car that's under $18,000. Don't care, as long as it. So what's satisfying is this: the first car that you come across that's $18,000 or less, you just buy it. That's an example of satisfying. So let's say when you go to the grocery store, when you say, hey, when I go to a grocery store, there's a bunch of bread. The first loaf of bread that's under $1, I'll buy it. Okay, so what's noticeable on this page? Go back, look at the highlighting here. Notice how much of the page is white compared to how much is yellow. Okay. Notice the dividing. So the 3 tasks dividing. I used a ruler and a black line to draw lines with major breaks. And notice here too is that I also wrote comments to go back to the structure here, where I'm especially emphasizing headings: bounded rationality, intuitive, creative. Okay. So then going to intuitive. So this is easy. It's like without conscious reasoning. They give an example of pilots. So when pilots fly a plane, they're intuitive. But this intuitive process, without conscious reasoning for a lot of the actions, is best performed by experts. So they're talking about fire chiefs, pilots, surgeons. Okay. So experience and training are part of that. Okay. Next, moving on. We're going to number 4, going back to the diagram here. Decisions, non-programmed, brick, bounded rationality, rational, intuitive, creative. So page 347, right side, making creative decisions. So this is creative, non-programmed decisions. So they talk about creativity, innovations, ideas, and actions. That's something that I came up with. I said, okay, innovations, ideas, plus actions. And then here on the bottom of page 347, they give an example of NASA, and I just wrote NASA example. NASA example continued. And then I wrote, notice here that I drew this line as a divider. Creative decision making. Which, again, going back to whenever you see a college textbook, I think a lot of times it helps to look at the diagrams. You can just look at the images, all the exhibits and figures in the book first to give you an overview of the chapter, and put some extra time into it. So creative decision making, problem, immersion, incubation, and illumination, verification, application. So and they describe these things, but basically to be creative, new ideas. Okay. So we're still talking about creative. And then you say, whenever you can make a list, 1, 2, 3 here. How do you know if the decision making is creative? 1, 2, 3. Fluency, flexibility, originality, which is in the creativity. Fluency is number of ideas. Flexibility is different ideas. Originality is uniqueness. So again, how do you know if your decision making is creative? Creative, 1, 2, 3. Fluency, flexibility, originality. Fluency. Okay, let's do an acronym: FFO, FOF, or OFF, off, OFF. It's a word. Okay? Originality, flexibility, and fluency. Okay, so fluency, how would you summarize fluency? Number of ideas. Flexibility, different ideas. Originality, uniqueness. So number, different, unique. Notice how I'm always trying to compress. So then I do a major break here. Okay, what's this break all about? Well, it's about the CEO of Netflix, Reed Hastings. That's what this paragraph's about. All right. One thing I would have to say is, one thing I don't like about the format of this chapter is I don't like the way they have the references. It's like just jammed into the middle of the writing. I would have preferred footnotes. Anyway, so then on page 348 on the left side, we're talking about being creative, Netflix, and then the next break here is, let's see here, experts talk about creativity, It's based on 3 factors: personality, attributes, and context. Next one's next line here: dimensions of creativity, break, creativity, generating ideas, brainstorming. Okay. So with a highlighting, so here's the thing too. If I had to rank, number one, if highlighting keywords is the one thing you can do when you're reading, and follow the 80-20 rule. If you're highlighting more than 20% of the page, it's too much. That's not how you do it. Notice how little I highlight. 20% is okay, but when it's less. But then if you add dividing, now the purpose of dividing is this. Within each paragraph, between the 2 long lines, you should be able to summarize it with just a few words. So for example, on page 348 in the middle of the page, this little chunk here, this between the 2 lines, this is about Netflix. And this goes back to compression. So this chunk of words, this paragraph, 1 word, Netflix. Okay? And then on page 348 at the bottom, the bottom paragraph, 1 word, brainstorming. Okay? Now, the thing is, one of the fears is like, well, what if I lose some information? It's like, you got to start somewhere. So first, the process of when you force yourself to summarize something with 1 word or like 1 sentence, it forces your brain to really concentrate on the material. Okay? You do have to learn this. Let's say you do have to learn more of this material in depth. You still need to start with the most important high value word, which is brainstorming. So you go with brainstorming, you keep adding on to it. Okay? Going the opposite way, where you try to learn all the words and then try to figure out later, that is a less efficient method. So it's better to come up with this division and say, okay, if I need to learn more about it, then you read deeper. So, but I know that the 3 words here is brainstorming, creativity, and generating ideas. Then you have an idea of what's going on in this paragraph, then you can read the rest of the paragraph. Moving on. Then they talk about page 350, like keywords here: composition, process, leadership, culture, and then avoiding group thinking. And then I read through it, but I felt like nothing else was worth highlighting, but I just wanted to just say, all right, these are key parts. This is important if, let's say, the teacher wants me to write on this topic a little bit later on. I'm like, okay, these are at least highlight the keywords and the headers. Okay. Then on page 351, this is a summary of what we just read. Going back to the diagram here, 343, decisions, non-program, 4 models, brick. And this is the diagram, which I think should have been at the beginning. So then I put some extra emphasis into this particular table here. So talking about decision making, non-programmed, brick, bounded rationality, rational, intuitive, and creative. And then looking at this table, having read through the material, I try to highlight the keywords. So rational, maximize alternatives, best choice. Bounded rationality, minimum is the key word for bounded rationality. You pick the first thing that meets the minimum criteria. You buy the first car that you come across that's under $18,000. Next, going to intuitive. Intuitive is, for example, a pilot or a surgeon based on lots of experience and training. This is especially important when time is an issue. There's a time pressure. Then finally, creative, coming up with new ideas, different ways of thinking. Okay, page 352. Notice how here this is key takeaways, and I even though it's a summary, I still highlight keywords and I put little divider things. And notice here, I'll put little squiggles between breaks in a sentence. This author, the professor who wrote this book, writes very long sentences. Long sentences are confusing, so it's better to break it down. Okay, so here we go. Decision making, choosing alternative action, break. Okay, and then from automatic programmed, non-programmed, structured. And that includes rational, bounded, and then you have brick. Okay, so basically decision making is choosing, among choosing choosing among alternatives and then taking action, automatic versus non-program, automatic program versus non-programmed, and then non-programmed is brick, structured. Sometimes I'll even break up parts of the sentence. And then here, non-programmed and structured, these are parts of two different sentences. So I'm making up for bad writing. So that's what decoding is all about. So based on my own experience, what I did was I actually read this chapter. This is my full treatment. Whenever I come across hard material, complex material, important material, especially if it's not written in the best way. I'll give you an example. Legal writing is very difficult sometimes, right? Long sentences. I'll do this. This is my example of everything. This is every single tool to attack the hardest material. So what I tried to do with this chapter, I went through this chapter and I actually read through it. And at the end of it, I was just like, what did I just read? Okay. So I was like, okay, there's an issue here. And I didn't entirely know what it was. And a lot of times, students will feel like it's their fault. But I will have to say this. If you're a willing student, you have to consider that it's not you. It's the writer of the material, right? But I will add one more thing. Sometimes if you're reading material and you're having difficulty, you need to consider. You have to make sure that your vocabulary is good enough. Because when I was in high school, once I started really focused on studying vocabulary, that's when my reading comprehension went up. So whenever you come across a word that you're not entirely sure about, you need to look up the words. Also, too, is going back to when you're reading here, the reason why vocabulary or studying vocabulary is important is because frequently in tests, teachers will frequently test vocabulary. What are definitions? Vocabulary is basically what's frequently is a large part of materials in a college course. So what's tested is frequently vocabulary, definitions of keywords, and then lists, top 10 lists. What's brick, those kind of things. Those are topics that frequently show up in the material. And then also too, so basically going back to my own experience. So the first time I read it, I read straight through, no highlighting, no marking or whatever, just read it. The material was like I read, and I was like, well, what's this? I had very little grasp of the material. It's like, okay, all I could say was this book was about decision making, right? And so then I said, all right, well, let me attack it more aggressively. So once I attacked it aggressively, especially when on page 343, I realized there's a problem with the author's writing. But once I broke it up, then I was able to extract information. But why did I commit to it? Because based on the tests and assignments, the information in this book is essential for success in the course that I'm taking. Because the tests come from the book, okay, and also the assignments reference the book. So I have to use this book. And once I've actually decoded the book, the material here is actually very useful information. And what's the beauty of this is, so for example, instead of when I'm doing repetitions, instead of rereading, I'll give you an example here. Instead of reading every single word on these pages here, I can just read the highlighted keywords and say, okay, so, and this goes back to testing myself. So in this particular paragraph, here's the puzzle. Each paragraph summarizes it. Okay, so this one's we're talking about rational decision making. You have to look at the alternatives, pros and cons, and then rank them. I just summarize this paragraph. Next, so I can actually review in about like 10 minutes. Next, this next paragraph is about analysis paralysis. That's when there's too much information, and which leads to inaction. Okay. So that's a way you can test yourself. So when you're reviewing, what you can do is summarize keywords, talk about the overall structure. For example, like this diagram here. And as you go through, try to summarize, do a summary of each one of those sections. Now, if you need more material after you do that, then read more deeply. Okay? Now, the ultimate way, if you want to know for yourself a difference between self-confidence versus self-efficacy, self-confidence is that feeling that you're good. Self-efficacy is proven. So, for example, this: if someone said to me, "It's like going, oh, can you ride a bicycle?" I'm like, "Yes." It's like, well, you're very confident. I'm like, no, that's actually self-efficacy because I know I can ride a bike because I've ridden a bike. I rode a bike when I was a child. I rode it. I ride a bicycle because it's proven that I can ride a bicycle. Right? Self-confidence is more of a feeling. Now, if you can go through this script and you can summarize this, for example, saying, okay, decision-making, programs, automatic, non-program, brick, bounded rationality, rational, intuitive, and creative, I just proved to myself that I can repeat this material, especially if you don't look at it. Okay? So the ultimate level of recitation, now when you do the recitation, you can refer to these notes. For example, let's say you're doing a presentation and these are your notes to present. You're the teacher. You're using these notes. You're allowed to use the notes, and you can refer to these notes to talk to students. But you have to make eye contact. Okay? So the next level is if you do it without the notes, or you don't look at the notes that much. All right. So just remember, compress and connect, summarize, structure, compress and connect. And that's how you read a college textbook efficiently.